He left the safe wide open, stacked with cash and priceless treasures, not as a mistake, but as a trap. He was sure the maid would fail. But what she did next didn't just shock him, it broke him. This is the story of a man who trusted no one, and the woman who changed everything without saying a word. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and like the video. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story moved you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Now, let's jump into the story. Nolan Hart had built empires from nothing. He had once believed in people, in loyalty, in the power of a handshake. But years in business had taught him otherwise. Partners had betrayed him. Friends had turned into liars. Even his own brother had stolen from him. Trust, Nolan decided long ago, was a luxury he could no longer afford. His home was a fortress now. Tall gates, motion sensors, cameras in every room. But inside, behind all the steel and security, was a man who barely slept. A man haunted by the question, who could be trusted? It was on a Monday morning that Marina Solis arrived at his estate. She was quiet, respectful, and moved with the kind of grace that goes unnoticed. Nolan had hired her through an agency. Background check, references, everything in order. But none of that mattered to him. Papers could be faked. Smiles could hide motives. Marina was in her early 30s. Her eyes held the tiredness of someone who had seen hard days, but also the strength of someone who kept going anyway. She never spoke unless spoken to. She cleaned carefully, never cutting corners, never lingering too long in one place. After 3 weeks of watching her through hidden cameras, Nolan made a decision. He would test her. One afternoon, when he knew she'd be cleaning the West Wing, he left his office door wide open. Inside, the safe was unlocked. Stacks of cash. A few watches worth more than most houses. Family heirlooms, all exposed. Nolan turned off the cameras in that room. This had to be a true test. No recordings. Just her. Just the silence. Just the choice. He hid in the next room, his heart pounding. Part of him hoped she would fail. It would confirm what he believed. People couldn't be trusted. At least then, he wouldn't have to wonder. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. She was coming. Marina walked into the office. Vacuum cleaner in H. She paused, noticing the safe. It was open and the contents were obvious. Her eyes settled on the watches, the money. Nolan held his breath. She didn't move toward the safe. Instead, she looked around the room, not with panic, not with greed, just a quiet curiosity. Then she did something unexpected. She walked over to the bookshelf, took out a small framed picture that had fallen behind some books, and placed it gently on the desk. It was a photo of a young girl, Nolan's daughter, who had passed away years ago. Marina picked up a feather duster and began cleaning the edges of the frame with care. She wiped down the desk. She straightened the papers. Then, from her pocket, she pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She placed it on the corner of the desk and walked away. Nolan waited until her footsteps disappeared down the hall. He stepped into the room, still stunned. The safe was untouched. Everything inside was exactly as he had left it. His eyes fell on the folded paper. He opened it. It was a child's drawing. Crayons on a torn notebook page. A house. 2 stick figures holding hands. At the top, in big block letters, were the words, "Thank you for helping my mommy work." Nolan sat down slowly. Something cracked inside him. For a long time, he just stared at the drawing. Then he looked at the photo of his daughter. He hadn't touched that frame in years. It was always buried behind books, hidden where he didn't have to see it. The silence in the room was heavy. But for once, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt honest. That night, Nolan couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of what he saw. This woman, who had every reason to take something, who no one would have blamed if she had pocketed a few bills, chose to do the right thing. Not because she was being watched, not because she wanted a reward, but because that's who she was. The next morning, Nolan sat at his desk, the child's drawing beside him. He opened his checkbook. He didn't know what amount to write. What's the price of being reminded that good people still exist? He didn't write a number. Instead, he left the check blank, signed it, and placed it in an envelope. On the front, he wrote one word, Marina, and beneath it, another note. You didn't take anything, but you gave me something back. Something I thought I'd lost forever. Thank you. He placed it on the kitchen counter, where he knew she'd find it. Nolan didn't hide this time. He watched from the hallway as she discovered the letter. She read it slowly. Then, quietly, she folded it back and held it to her chest. She didn't take the check. She left it on the counter. Instead, she took the drawing her daughter had made and pinned it to the refrigerator. And then she went back to cleaning, like it was just another day. But for Nolan, it wasn't. It was the first day in a long time that he believed people could still be good. The sun rose over the quiet hills of Nolan Hart's estate, casting long shadows across the stone driveway. The birds were chirping, but inside the house, silence ruled. Nolan sat alone in his office, staring at the child's drawing that now rested on his desk. It was simple, just crayons and paper, but it had done something no amount of wealth ever could. It had stirred something inside him he thought was long gone. He picked up the drawing again, running his fingers over the uneven edges. Thank you for helping my mommy work, it said in big, colorful letters. It wasn't just a message. It was a mirror, reflecting a truth he hadn't seen in years, maybe longer. Marina Solis had walked into a trap, and she had passed with quiet grace. She hadn't touched the open safe. She hadn't stolen even a glance at the money. Instead, she had done her job and left behind a piece of her heart, disguised as her daughter's simple thank you. Nolan didn't know what to make of it. For years, he had lived in fear of betrayal. People had let him down over and over. He had learned to expect the worst. He believed honesty was just a word people used to make themselves look good. But now, here was Marina, a woman who had nothing, proving him wrong. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in a romantic way, not in a dramatic way, but in a human way. Who was she, really? What kind of life did she live? What did it take for someone to choose right, even when no one was watching? That evening, he made a quiet decision. He asked his assistant to find out more about Marina, just enough to understand who she was. Not to invade her privacy, but to know her story. What he learned humbled him. Marina was a single mother. Her husband had died in a construction accident 2 years ago. Since then, she had worked 2 jobs to support her children. Her father had a heart condition and needed medication they could barely afford. She had no fancy degrees, no savings, no safety net, just a will to survive and a heart that refused to give up. And yet, she never asked for help. She never complained. She never acted like the world owed her anything. Nolan sat in his chair long after sunset, looking out the window at the empty driveway. In his world, people wore masks. They smiled to your face and stole behind your back. But Marina, she had no mask, just honesty. He remembered how carefully she had placed the picture of his daughter on the desk. She didn't know whose it was. She didn't ask, but she treated it like it mattered, like it deserved to be seen. Nolan leaned back and closed his eyes. He hadn't looked at that photo in years. After his daughter's death, he had pushed it all away. The memories, the pain, the love. It was easier to shut it out. Safer. But Marina had opened something. Not the safe, not the room, something deeper. The next morning, Marina returned to work like it was just another day. She wore the same plain clothes, carried the same quiet energy. She didn't know Nolan had been watching. She didn't know her simple action had left him wide awake at night. As she cleaned the hallway, she noticed something unusual. The office door was closed, but taped to it was a note with her name on it. She opened it slowly, her hands shaking just a little. Inside was a letter, handwritten, from Nolan. He wrote about trust, about how he had tested her, about how she had passed in a way that he never expected. He said he was sorry for ever doubting her. He said she reminded him of what real strength looked like. At the bottom of the envelope was the blank check. But Marina didn't take it. She read the letter twice, folded it back, and placed it gently in her bag. Then, quietly, she walked to the refrigerator and pinned up her daughter's drawing once more. This time, right in the center. Nolan watched from the hallway, unseen. He saw her face, not proud, not angry, just peaceful. She didn't want a reward. She didn't need a spotlight. She was who she was, and that was enough. As Marina went back to her work, Nolan stayed behind the corner. He didn't say a word, but something inside him had changed. For the first time in years, he believed in something he couldn't buy. He believed in her. And more importantly, he believed that maybe, just maybe, people could still surprise him in the best possible way. That night, as the house grew quiet again, Nolan opened the safe, not to check for what was missing, but to put something new inside. He placed the drawing inside a folder, labeled it "Day I Was Wrong," and locked it up. Not because he wanted to, but because some truths are worth keeping close. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window of Nolan Hart's estate, casting a soft light on the marble countertops. Everything looked the same as it always did, clean, quiet, untouched. But today there was something new. A plain white envelope rested on the counter. No logo, no seal, just one word written in careful handwriting: Marina. She arrived at her usual time, dressed in the same faded blue shirt, hair pulled back neatly. She moved with quiet purpose, never rushing, never wasting time. She didn't see the envelope at first. She started her routine, wiping down surfaces, setting the breakfast tray, watering the plants in the corner. Then she noticed it. A note, her name. She paused. Slowly, she walked over, drying her hands on a towel. She picked up the envelope, opened it gently, and pulled out the letter inside. It was from Nolan. His words were honest and simple. He wrote that he had tested her trust, that he had left the safe open, expecting her to fail. But instead of disappointment, he had found something he thought no longer existed: real honesty. He admitted he was wrong. He thanked her, not just for doing her job, but for reminding him that good people still walk this earth. Tucked behind the letter was a signed check, blank, no amount filled in, just his name at the bottom and a message written above it. For whatever your dreams cost, write the number. Marina stared at the check for a long time. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her eyes didn't water. Not yet. She folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and set it down beside the fruit bowl. She didn't take the check. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out another piece of paper. This one was from her daughter. A new drawing, a colorful one. It showed a large house, 2 stick figures, and 3 smiling children. Above them in big, bold letters were the words, This house is safe because my mommy works there. Marina smiled. Not a big smile, just enough. She pinned the drawing to the fridge, right in the center. Then she went back to work. Upstairs, Nolan had been watching from the balcony. Not spying, just observing, trying to understand. He had spent most of his life surrounded by people who took more than they gave. Partners, investors, even relatives. But this woman, who barely spoke unless spoken to, had given him more than any of them ever had. He couldn't stop thinking about what to do next. He had money, more than he needed, but he knew now that money wasn't the answer. Not for her, not for him. He needed to know what mattered to Marina. Later that afternoon, Nolan called a private investigator he trusted, not to dig into her life, but to confirm something he had started to suspect. What came back was more than he expected. Marina lived in a small, rented apartment with her 2 children and her aging father. The place was clean, but cramped. Her daughter wanted to go to art school. Her father's medication cost more each month than her paycheck. Still, Marina had never missed a day of work, never asked for anything. She was surviving, but just barely. Nolan fought long and hard that night. The check she had left on the counter was still there, untouched. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen before she arrived. He took the check and tore it in half, not out of anger, but because he understood now. She didn't want money thrown at her. She wanted something real. He sat down and wrote a new letter. This time, it wasn't just words. It was an offer. In the letter, he explained that he was setting up a trust fund for her daughter's education, that her father's medical bills would be covered starting immediately, and that the guest house on the property, which had been sitting empty for years, was now hers and her family's to live in, rent-free, for as long as they needed. No catch, no strings. He left the new envelope on the counter. Same spot, same simple name, Marina. When she arrived, she saw it right away. She opened it without hesitation. As she read, her hands began to shake. Tears welled in her eyes. This time, she didn't hide them. She looked around the kitchen, then toward the hallway, unsure if anyone was watching. But she didn't care. She folded the letter and placed it in her purse. Then she walked outside to the back garden where Nolan was standing near the fountain, watering a plant that didn't need it. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she spoke. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nolan didn't reply right away. He simply nodded. "Your daughter's drawing," he finally said, "means more to me than you know." She smiled. This time, wider. In that moment, there were no rich or poor, no employer, no employee, just 2 people who had lived through loss and found something unexpected in each other, a reason to believe in goodness again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, laughter echoed from the guest house. The lights were on. The windows were open. The sound of children playing filled the air, and on the fridge in the main house, the drawing still hung proudly. A quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest acts change everything. Weeks passed quietly on the Hart estate. The air felt lighter. The halls, once cold and silent, now carried the soft sounds of life. Laughter echoed from the guest house. Children's footsteps could be heard in the garden. For the first time in years, the house felt like a home. Nolan Hart watched it all from his window each morning. He no longer felt like a prisoner inside his own home. He no longer hid behind closed doors or watched from cameras. Something inside him had changed, though he couldn't fully explain it. It wasn't just about Marina or her children. It was about rediscovering something he thought he had lost forever: peace. Marina had taken on a new role on the estate. She now managed the household. She organized schedules, hired staff, and kept everything running smoothly. Her quiet nature remained, but her confidence grew. She didn't act as if she had been given anything. She carried herself as someone who had earned it. Nolan noticed the way she handled each task, with care, with purpose, without asking for recognition. She didn't speak much, but her actions said everything. She had brought life back into his world, not by force, but by simply being herself. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Marina walked into Nolan's office, holding something in her hands. It was a wrapped bundle tied with a ribbon. She handed it to him without a word. Inside was a framed painting. It was done by her daughter. The painting showed the estate, but not as it appeared in real life. In the painting, flowers bloomed all over the house. The sky was bright. Birds flew in the background. And in the middle stood three figures: Marina, her daughter, and Nolan. Above the painting, in bold, colorful letters, were the words, "Home is where honesty lives." Nolan stared at it for a long moment. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His hands held the frame gently, like it was something fragile, something sacred. He looked up at Marina, who stood waiting. "This means more to me than you know," he finally said. She nodded. "We mean what we draw," she replied softly. He placed the painting on the mantel, above the fireplace that had gone unused for years. Later that evening, as he sat in his study, Nolan thought back to everything that had happened. He remembered the test, the open safe, the letter on the counter. He remembered how he used to live, with suspicion, guarded walls, and a heart closed off from the world. He had once believed his wealth was the only thing that mattered. He worked all his life to protect it, to grow it, to keep it safe. But now, sitting in the same room where he once tested another human being's honesty, he realized something important. The real treasure was not in his bank account. It was not the watches, the rare coins, or the safe full of bills. The real treasure had been walking through his doors every morning, showing up on time, doing her job, caring for her family, holding on to her values. The real treasure was trust. He had spent years protecting himself from pain, but it was trust, not fear, that had brought him peace. And that peace had come from Marina. It had come from a drawing by a child. It had come from choosing to see people not for what they might take, but for who they truly are. The next morning, Nolan joined Marina and her children in the garden. They were planting flowers. The boy was digging, the girl was laughing, and Marina was on her knees, guiding their little hands. Nolan didn't say much. He just knelt beside them and started digging too. Marina handed him a small plant. "Roses," she said. "They take time, but when they bloom, they're worth it." He placed it in the soil, pressed it down, and smiled. Later, as they all sat under the old tree by the edge of the yard, Nolan looked at the children. They didn't care about his money. They didn't know who he used to be. All they saw was the man who let them plant flowers and gave them space to run. He watched Marina laugh with them, sunlight in her hair, and he knew he had found something no safe could ever hold. This was the kind of wealth that couldn't be stolen. Honesty, kindness, second chances. As the day faded and the lights came on across the estate, Nolan felt something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. In the end, it wasn't about what he gave away or what he got in return. It was about what he learned. That even in a world full of doubt, one honest act could change everything. That even behind quiet voices, powerful stories live. and that sometimes the richest people are the ones who give without being asked, love without conditions, and lead without needing praise. That was the real treasure, and now he knew it had been there all along.